Hey guys, Darren Miles with Darren Miles Photography, based here in beautiful, sunny Southwest Florida. Well, this afternoon I actually got a break because the weather turned a little bit sour. It's actually a bit overcast and kind of windy today, so my video shoot that I had this afternoon canceled. And what I decided I would do is take the opportunity to review a lens that I've been using for a while now in my real estate work. Now, I haven't used it much for stills, but I've used it a lot in my professional real estate video work, and overall, I think it's pretty cool. Now, the main reason why I haven't been using it in stills is because at 43 megapixels, file sizes are really big, and that actually slows me down in post-processing. But I do love the video that the A7R3 creates, so I've been using this lens for my real estate videos. And this lens is the Samyang 14mm f2.8 lens for Sony FE mount cameras like the A7R3 and the A7R II that I haven't made it to here. Coming in at a list price of $849, but often discounted to $599, the Samyang is considerably less expensive than virtually every other offering in the marketplace today, again for Sony full-frame cameras. Now, given that it's so much less expensive, can the Sammy compete with those much more expensive offerings? Well, let's find out. First up is build quality, and straight out of the box, the Samyang is actually a very pleasant surprise, especially when compared to other previous Samyang lenses that I've used and tested. This one is a serious step up. The smooth matte finish of the lens barrel is considerably smoother and just more sleek looking than its predecessors, and this one is also made out of metal. The lens cap actually snaps on and off with a reasonable degree of certainty, whereas previous Samyang lenses that I've used in the past, the lens caps were really kind of flimsy and plasticky and didn't always stay on. This one is much nicer. Coming in at nearly 18 ounces or 505 grams, the Samyang is actually a fairly hefty beast, but it's not overly burdensome. It certainly weighs nothing when compared to the Sigma 14mm f1.8, but it's also noticeably heavier than the Zeiss Batis 18mm f2.8. The focus ring is wide and ribbed and super fluid with hardly any resistance at all. And like virtually every other autofocus lens available from Sony or for Sony, the manual focus aspect of the lens is fly-by-wire, which means the lens elements are not physically attached to the focus ring. Rather, they are electronically attached, and how quickly the manual focus reacts correlates directly to how fast you rotate the ring, which means there are no physical markings on the outside of the lens barrel to give you an exact point of focus, which can be an issue for some videographers. Now, check out that front element. Though not as big nor as bulbous as the Sigma 14mm f1.8 lens, the Samyang does still in fact shout from the rooftops that it is a wide-angle lens. Now, unfortunately, standard screw-on filters, well, they need not apply. On the inside, it's an optical formula of 14 elements arranged in 10 groups, and included in that formula are, according to Samyang's information, 3 aspherical elements to control spherical aberrations for increased clarity and resolution from edge to edge. There are 2 extra low dispersion glass elements that reduce chromatic aberrations, improve overall image sharpness, clarity, and color fidelity. What is color fidelity? They also help minimize the overall weight of the lens. They've also added something called an ultra multi coating in order to reduce flare and ghosting for increased contrast and a neutral color balance. Now, this all sounds really good and impressive, and when we get into the optics section, we'll see how well all these things work in practice. The aperture ranges from f2.8 to f22, and speaking of the aperture, there are 7 rounded aperture blades. Now, I've mentioned this virtually every time that I've done a wide-angle lens review, and basically when we buy one of these things, we're usually not buying them for their dazzling bokeh or autofocus rendering capabilities. That said, however, the bokeh from the 14mm is actually of pretty decent quality, but bokeh quality, that's really highly subjective stuff. Now, interestingly, unlike the majority of lenses at this price point, the Samyang is actually weather sealed. Now, to me, that's pretty impressive. So overall, the Samyang is a finely sculpted barrel that's weather sealed, has a decent lens cap, though I do wish it was made out of a slightly more robust material. But really, it's not that bad at all. Now, in the end, this is to date easily the best built Samyang lens that I've ever used, which is nice to see, again, especially at these relative bargain basement price points. So for build, the Samyang gets a very solid 9.5 out of 10. All right, next up is autofocus speed and accuracy. And outfitted with Samyang's integrated autofocus motor that works in conjunction with Sony cameras' autofocusing systems, AF is brisk, and in my experience, it's actually pretty accurate. But let me just go ahead and demo this really quickly. So let's get something really close. You can hear the beep, and something far away, and something up close again. I mean, that's pretty fast. But kind of like autofocus bokeh rendering, fast autofocus with a wide-angle lens is one of those things that's kind of nice to have, but in the end, it's not going to be a deal breaker if the lens doesn't have fast autofocus speed. It is nice to see that the Samyang does in fact have fast and accurate autofocus. Now, like a lot of mirrorless cameras, we do get a little bit of back and forth before it locks onto the subject, but it happens so quickly that you barely even notice it. The lens motor is, however, just a little bit audible. It has like this really high-pitched whirring sound, which can be an issue for videographers, and you might want to be aware of that, as it's likely to get picked up by a microphone. Now, with regard to manual focus, I don't know if it was the lens or the A7R Mark III or what the deal was, but I would focus, and you can see the focus peaking is active here, and it looked really sharp in the viewfinder, and I would use the lens for a while, and then later on in the shoot, I hadn't touched the focus wheel, but the image would suddenly render slightly out of focus. It's almost as if the manual focus would drift on the lens. I don't know if it's a fly-by-wire thing or a sensitivity thing, or the A7R Mark III. Maybe the focus peaking wasn't all that great, but I was getting some very inconsistent results with the A7R Mark III and the focus peaking and the Samyang 14mm f2.8. I found that in my videos, in general, autofocus continuous seemed to work better because the depth of field is so wide at 14 millimeters that even with continuous autofocus, unless there was an object right in front of the camera, most of the scene would render in focus most of the time. Now, one other important thing of note, depending on when you purchase the lens, Samyang did just recently update the firmware of these lenses, and it's done via something that they refer to as the lens station. It's an added accessory you have to purchase, but it's very similar to the Sigma dock, and once it's been updated, autofocus speed was considerably better, faster, and much more consistent, especially in video. But all in, it's a fast, mostly silent, and very accurate performance, and as such, the Samyang earns a 9.5 out of 10 for autofocus speed and accuracy. Next up is optical quality and the quality of the results. Now, naturally, the first question you have to be asking yourself is this lens any good optically, especially when you consider that it is so much less expensive than the competition? Now, granted, I've been using the Samyang primarily for video work and not a whole lot for stills. And again, that's only because at almost 43 megapixels, the A7R Mark III sensor is just a little bit too much for me to handle in post, given the sheer volume of work that I do. So I find myself using the A7R Mark III a lot in my video work because I really like the video quality. Now, I've taken quite a few still pictures with the Samyang, and overall, I'm impressed. At f2.8, the lens isn't tack sharp, but it is more than acceptable for the majority of clients. And I shoot most of my videos at f2.8, and thus far my clients really like the output, though I do find myself adding some sharpening in Final Cut. So straight out of the box, it's pretty clear the Sigma 14 and the Zeiss 18 are definitely sharper. But that's the trade-off, because the Sammy isn't as sharp out of the box, but again, you have to consider that it is so much less expensive, and truthfully, adding sharpening to my footage doesn't add a whole lot of time in post-production. And in the end, I don't really feel like I'm sacrificing a ton optically, given, again, the finished results and the reactions of my clients. Now, vignetting, flare, chromatic aberrations are all reasonably well controlled, and the majority of these things in stills can very easily be fixed in programs like Lightroom. Now, that said, as with all my reviews, don't take my word for it. See for yourself. The next 2 to 3 minutes will be a series of video clips and still photographs taken with the Samyang 14mm f2.8 lens, and the majority of the pictures that you're going to be seeing here were taken with the A7R Mark III. And in the end, when you consider the price point of the Samyang, to me, they just hit it out of the park. Last up is value. With market-leading value prices, like virtually every other Samyang lens in the marketplace today, and by the way, Samyang is also branded as Rokinon and Bauer. They're all the exact same lenses with a different name brand on them. I don't know why Samyang does that, but they do. And for whatever reason, I prefer the Rokinon brand name the best, but that's just me. Back to value. With the list price of $749, it's often discounted by $250 to give us a real sales price of $599. The Samyang is a borderline no-brainer for full-frame Sony Alpha 7 users. We're getting about 90 to 95% of the optical quality, and in my opinion, similar build quality for about half to one-third of the price when compared to the Sigma 14 and the Zeiss Batis 18, respectively. Samyang has a history of producing quality, mostly manual focus optics at very reasonable prices. This move into the Sony full-frame autofocus lens segment, I think, has to be summed up as a success because at this price to quality ratio, in my opinion, the 14mm f2.8 from Samyang is a tremendous value and easily earns a 10 out of 10 for value. To wrap up this review, we gave the Samyang 14mm f2.8 lens a 47 out of 50 and our highly recommended rating. The final word: if you happen to be a real estate photographer or real estate videographer, then I can't see how you could possibly go wrong with picking up a Samyang 14mm f2.8 lens for your Sony or other camera mount system, be it Canon or Nikon, etc. Because just based on price alone, the Samyang represents a tremendous value with optics that have been more than acceptable for the overwhelming majority of my clients. And I've got some pretty demanding clients. At least that's clearly been the case for me as my real estate video work is really beginning to take off, and I'm doing almost all of it with the Samyang. Though I admit there is little doubt that there are better optical offerings in the marketplace today, it's just that I'm not 100% convinced that the other lenses are worth 2 to sometimes 3 times as much as the Samyang. I'm Darren Miles with Darren Miles Photography, based here in beautiful, sunny Southwest Florida. If you like videos like this, please give me a like, or better yet, subscribe. And until the next time, happy shooting.